In the year 70 AD, on the 9th day of the month of Avar, smoke is already rising over Jerusalem's lower city, when a Roman soldier sets both hands against a block of pale limestone, the size of a small chariot, balanced on the edge of the Temple Mount's southern wall, 40 feet above the street. He shoves it. For a moment, the stone seems to hang in the air. Then it tips, falls, and slams into the paved stones below with a crash the historian Josephus says could be heard across the burning city. Market stalls splinter beneath it. The pilgrims who sold doves and changed coin here only days earlier are gone, fled, or worse. 19 centuries later, archaeologists will find stones like it, fallen and fused into the rubble exactly where they landed, the first hard evidence in a search that, in the most important places, is still unfinished. This is Bible Stories Unearthed, where we retell the narratives of Scripture alongside the history, archaeology, and ancient world that give them their full weight. Today, the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, the platform Herod the Great built over the site where Solomon's temple is said to have stood, and what decades of digging around its edges but never beneath it have actually revealed. The hill at the center of this story rises just over 2,400 feet above sea level, a modest height made enormous by the events Scripture places there. Jewish tradition identifies it as Mount Moriah, the place where Abraham was tested, and where, centuries later, King David purchased a threshing floor from a man named Araunah and built an altar to end a plague. By the time Herod the Great came to power as a Roman client king in the 1st century BC, this hill had already carried the weight of sacred memory for the better part of 1,000 years. A modest second temple stood there, rebuilt generations earlier by Jewish exiles returning from Babylon. Herod himself was not popular. He came from a family outside Judea's old royal line and held his throne by Roman appointment rather than inheritance, and many of his Jewish subjects never fully accepted him. Like other rulers without a secure claim to legitimacy, he turned to architecture to make his case. What he built on this hill would outlast his reputation by 2,000 years. The story, as Scripture tells it, begins long before Herod. After buying Araunah's threshing floor, David wanted to build God a permanent house there, but it was his son Solomon who completed it, according to the biblical account, sometime in the middle of the 10th century BC. The temple took 7 years to build, paneled in cedar shipped down from Lebanon, overlaid inside with gold, and centered on a small, windowless inner chamber called the Holy of Holies, where the Ark of the Covenant was kept. For roughly 4 centuries it stood as the religious heart of the Kingdom of Judah until 586 BC, when the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar II burned it to the ground and marched the population into exile. The temple did not stay buried for long. Within 2 generations, Jewish exiles permitted to return by the Persian king, Cyrus rebuilt it on the same hill, dedicating a far more modest structure around 516 BC. Older residents who remembered Solomon's original wept when they saw how small it was. But the site itself never lost its sanctity, and 5 centuries later, that unbroken thread of memory is exactly what Herod inherited and used when he set out to remake the hill entirely. Beginning around 20 BC, he made his move. Herod launched one of the largest construction projects anywhere in the ancient world. He did not simply renovate the existing temple. He buried the hill itself beneath an artificial platform, roughly 35 acres in size, nearly doubling the sacred area. To do it, his engineers extended massive retaining walls down into the surrounding valleys, founded in places on bedrock more than 100 feet below the surface, and packed the space behind them with rubble and vaulted stone chambers to create a perfectly level platform on top. One block in particular, a stone later generations would call the Western Stone, is estimated by some surveys to weigh more than 500 tons, making it one of the heaviest objects ever moved by human hands without powered machinery. Even the more ordinary blocks, several tons apiece, were finished so precisely that even now, after 2,000 years of earthquakes, the joints in places barely admit a knife blade. It was, by any honest measure, one of the engineering wonders of the Roman world, and Herod's Jewish subjects, whatever they thought of him personally, came to regard the building itself with genuine awe. On top of that platform, Herod laid out a temple complex graded in careful rings of holiness. The outermost area, the Court of the Gentiles, was open to anyone, Jew or foreigner, ritually pure or not, and it became one of the busiest public plazas in the Roman East, lined with covered porticos where money changers converted foreign coin into temple currency and merchants sold animals for sacrifice. It was here, according to the Gospels, that Jesus overturned the tables of those same money changers. Beyond this open court stood a low stone barrier called the soreg, and mounted along it at intervals were inscribed warning stones, written in Greek, telling any non-Jew in blunt terms that to go any further was to risk death. Beyond the soreg lay the court of women, then the court of Israel for Jewish men, then the court of priests, and finally the sanctuary itself, where only priests on active duty could enter. That barrier was not a formality. Years later, according to the book of Acts, the Apostle Paul was seized by an angry crowd in the temple precincts after being accused, wrongly, the text says, of bringing a Gentile companion past the soreg into the forbidden inner courts. The mob very nearly killed him on the spot, and Roman soldiers had to intervene to pull him out alive. It was, in other words, exactly the crime those warning stones existed to prevent, treated by the crowd with exactly the lethal seriousness the inscriptions promised. For decades, the Temple Mount functioned as the center of Jewish religious life under Roman rule, a place of daily sacrifice, of pilgrimage feasts that swelled Jerusalem's population several times over, and of the kind of architectural splendor that, according to Josephus, made first-time visitors mistake the gold-covered roof of the sanctuary for a snow-capped mountain catching the morning sun. It could not last. Tensions between Jewish populations and Roman administrators built for years and erupted into open revolt in the year 66 AD. 4 years later, the Roman general Titus brought the rebellion to its end with the siege and destruction of Jerusalem. Josephus, who watched the city fall, describes a fire so fierce that gold fittings inside the sanctuary melted and ran molten into the cracks between the stones. Roman soldiers, driven by fury and the promise of plunder, tore the complex apart course by course, prying loose the great retaining wall blocks and hurling them down into the streets below, the very moment this episode opened with. When the smoke finally cleared, the sanctuary itself was gone, the platform reduced to scorched, empty pavement. Only sections of Herod's outer retaining walls remained standing, including the segment later generations would come to call the Western Wall. The hill's story did not end there. Roman authorities are thought to have erected a temple to Jupiter on the site after crushing a second Jewish revolt in the year 135, and for the centuries that followed, under Christian Byzantine rule, the platform was largely left in ruins, a state some early Christian writers treated as confirmation of prophecy. That changed again in the 7th century AD with the rise of Islam. Around the year 691 AD, the Umayyad ruler Abd al-Malik, who held the title Caliph, built the Dome of the Rock at the platform's summit, enshrining the exposed bedrock beneath it, traditionally associated in Islamic belief with the Prophet Muhammad's night journey and ascension. The Al-Aqsa Mosque followed nearby within a generation. The platform became known as Al-Haram al-Sharif, the noble sanctuary, and remains the third holiest site in Islam. Across the centuries that followed, Crusader, Mamluk, and Ottoman rule among them. Control of the city changed hands many times, but the hill itself never went quiet. Since the 1967 war, Israel has held overall security control of the site while day-to-day religious administration has remained with the Jordanian-funded Islamic Waqf, the body responsible for managing the mosque compound, an arrangement generally called the status quo. It means the same elevated platform stands today as the holiest site in Judaism and the third holiest in Islam, occupied by the same handful of acres, and almost entirely closed to formal excavation. That last point shapes everything we actually know. No archaeologist has been permitted to conduct a controlled excavation directly on the Temple Mount platform since Israel took control of the Old City in 1967, out of respect for its standing as an active site of worship for both Muslim and Jewish communities. Nearly everything modern archaeology has established about this hill comes from its edges, not its surface. The most important of those edge excavations began in 1968, when archaeologist Benjamin Mazar led a decade-long dig along the southern wall, one of the largest excavation projects undertaken in Israel at the time. His team uncovered the base of what is now called Robinson's Arch, a monumental staircase structure, and beneath it, a paved Herodian period street still buried under massive fallen stones, the very wall stones thrown down during the Roman destruction, found exactly where they landed 2,000 years earlier. Nearby, excavators recovered a fallen parapet block inscribed in Hebrew, "To the place of trumpeting," confirming Josephus's account that priests once signaled the start of the Sabbath from that corner with a trumpet blast. A separate find, made decades earlier in 1871 by French archaeologist Charles Clermont-Ganneau, has done more than almost any other artifact to confirm the layout described in ancient texts. It is one of the Temple Warning Inscriptions, limestone slabs in Greek, posted along the Sauric barrier, warning foreigners in language nearly identical to what Josephus and the philosopher Philo separately describe. A second fragment surfaced in 1936. Together, these stones are among the clearest physical confirmations anywhere of the legal world the New Testament describes, proof that the threat against Paul in the book of Acts was not poetic exaggeration but a real, formally posted Roman-sanctioned penalty. South of the mount, in an area called the Ophel, Archaeologist Mazar led excavations uncovering substantial fortifications, including a gatehouse complex she dated to the 10th century BC and associated with Solomon's building program. That dating remains debated. Some scholars place the same structures a century or more later, part of a wider, ongoing disagreement among archaeologists over how much monumental building can be credited to Solomon's era at all. A fragment of pottery found nearby in 2012, bearing the earliest known alphabetic inscription found in Jerusalem, has likewise drawn competing interpretations of what its faint letters actually say. Then there is the Temple Mount Sifting Project. In 1999, during construction work to create a new entrance for an underground mosque on the mount, heavy machinery was brought directly onto the platform. Front-end loaders cut into the ancient vaulted substructures beneath the surface, carving out an estimated 9,000 tons of soil without a prior archaeological survey, and trucking it away to be dumped in the Kidron Valley as ordinary construction debris. Israeli archaeologists objected strongly, arguing the work destroyed irreplaceable context about exactly where and in what layer of ground each object had originally been buried. Since the debris could no longer be studied in its original layers, researchers Gabriel Barkay and Zaki Dvira have spent 2 decades since hand-sifting that soil instead, recovering hundreds of thousands of individual artifacts spanning the Bronze Age to the Ottoman period, including First Temple period seals and, as recently as July 2025, a clay ceiling bearing a name associated with an official from the reign of King Josiah. It is a remarkable record, but because the soil was removed before it could be excavated in place, none of these finds can be tied to a specific structure the way controlled excavation normally allows. What none of this changes is the central fact: nothing has ever been excavated in its original position beneath the platform itself, and certainly not beneath the rock the dome of the rock now covers, the spot most directly associated with the location of Solomon's temple. Whatever physical evidence of the First Temple period may or may not survive directly under that golden roof remains, as of today, untouched and unseen. Few places on Earth carry this much unresolved weight in this little space. A single elevated platform, smaller than most university campuses, functions simultaneously as the holiest site in Judaism, the third holiest in Islam, and a place of deep historical resonance for Christians who read of Jesus teaching in its porticos. 3 different communities, each with a claim on the same 35 acres, each shaped by what they believe lies beneath their feet. Archaeology has done remarkable work around the margins of that question, and almost none of it directly underneath. The most argued over ground on the planet has been measured, mapped, and sifted from nearly every angle but one, and what sits beneath that golden dome remains exactly what it has always been to everyone who has never been allowed to look, unseen and, for now, unknowable. If this story has stayed with you, Bible Stories Unearthed has a growing library of e-books that go deeper into the archaeology and history behind the biblical world. You'll find the link to our author page in the description below. Thank you for being here. This story has been told. Subscribe and return to Bible Stories Unearthed. The book is open. Let's unearth more.